"Where are you, Jesus? Why are you not with us?" Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd that he just fed. After he said goodbye to them, he went away to the mountain to pray. Well into the night, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. He saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Very early in the morning, he came toward them, walking on the sea, and wanted to pass by them. I don't know what that means exactly. He wanted to pass by them. But I just imagine, here in just a minute and finish this paragraph, but I just imagine Jesus being like, I bet these guys are so freaked out right now because they're straining hard against the wind and the waves. And it says he wanted to pass by them, just like, hey guys, just out for an evening stroll, right? This is how at peace Jesus is, in contrast to how spun out the disciples must have been. He wanted to pass by them. Verse 49, when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately, he spoke to them and said, "Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. They were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves that he had just miraculously multiplied. Instead, their hearts were hardened. The first question that we're going to ask ourselves that we find in our text tonight, is my heart desensitized? I said, instead, their hearts were hardened. And like the disciples, our hearts become desensitized when we don't understand what Jesus is doing. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've wondered, what are you doing, God? I had conversations this week with some of you in this room asking that very question. What are you doing? It's not a bad question. It's actually a good question. But when we persist in not understanding the work of Jesus and not understanding the character of Jesus, our hearts can become desensitized or hardened. What's interesting about these verses that we just read in verses 45 to 48, we see that after this miracle has just taken place, what does Jesus do? Mark uses his favorite word. If you read through the Gospel of Mark, you see that he uses this word immediately. It's a rapid book. It's fast-paced. And he uses it here. And he says, right after this miracle happened, immediately Jesus told them to get into the boat. And he sent them across to the other side while he stayed to say goodbye to the crowds that he had just cared for, that he had just shown compassion for. I have to imagine that what the disciples felt in that moment was, why is he not coming with us? Why is he not getting in the boat with us? I know he's a very likable person. You know that? Jesus was, in his earthly ministry, he was a very likable person. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually good. That's a Christ-like posture for us to have. One of our values here at Northtown Trinity is Christ-likeness. And I imagine that the disciples were watching Jesus as he sent them to the other side and just going like, as likable as you are, I'm sure you could get a boat ride across tomorrow, but why are you not coming with us? And they must have asked in that moment what you may be asking in this moment, where are you, Jesus? Why are you not with us? Why are you sending me through this storm? And it seems like you're hanging back. Anybody felt like that? This year, this week, today? When Jesus tells us to do something that doesn't make sense, when he has us walk through a storm that doesn't make sense to us, will you trust him? Will you, unlike the 12, remember the miracle that he has performed in your life? You know, if you're a Christian, that's the greatest miracle of all, because he transferred you from the domain of darkness into the kingdom of light. He's taken you from death to life. So when he asks you to walk through that storm, will you trust him? Will you trust his character? Will you trust his promise? But then in verse 49, I love this. They saw him walking on the sea and thought it was a ghost and cried out. And immediately he spoke to them and said, "Have courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." Hang on to those words as you're walking through that storm. And let me remind you, friend, if you're not walking through a storm right now, you most likely just came out of one, or you're most likely about to head into one. That's not me being pessimistic. That's me recognizing the fact that we live in a world that is broken by sin. So when Jesus comes to you in surprising ways, will you recognize him? I love that this is the way that Mark writes this down for us. He says that Jesus came to them on the sea, just out for a leisurely stroll, and they thought he was a ghost. Maybe you're thinking of that storm that you're walking through right now, and you're thinking, Jesus hasn't come to me, and maybe he has, and we've failed to recognize him. When he asks you to do something that doesn't make sense, will you trust him? And when he comes to you in surprising ways, will you recognize him? A desensitized heart, like the disciples here, can see God at work and yet fail to recognize him in it. The disciples, like our right atrium, if you'll bear with the metaphor, had just experienced one of the most astonishing miracles in human history, when Jesus just continued to take 5 loaves and 2 fishes and just keep distributing it. They had just seen this happen. They've just received, but they're not revived. And a desensitized heart can't revive. Their hearts took without being changed. And maybe that's you tonight. Maybe you have received from God's gracious hand, but you haven't been changed by it. A desensitized heart like that sees God, but it doesn't really recognize him. So what do we do? How are we supposed to read these verses, think about these ideas, and walk out of this room in a little while changed? Well, the first thing I want to invite you to do is to ask God to show you where you've become desensitized to the work of Jesus. Where have I become desensitized to your work, Jesus? Where has my heart become hardened? Where have I seen you at work and yet not recognized you? Where have you asked me to do something that doesn't make sense and I haven't trusted you? Where have you come to me in my storm and I've not recognized you? Where have I become desensitized? It's not a death sentence. Thank God we have the greatest heart surgeon of all time. If you have that issue in your heart, there's hope.